whoops, that's the other league. Yeah, see if I see him on Facebook.
Yep, it's on YouTube as well. So perfect. All right. Welcome back, everybody. We are live on our Monday night IDP live stream, and I am joined by the dynamic duo Paul and Kraig again. We are going to be talking all things NFL draft. We're going to talk rookies, their landing spots. Paul's going to tell me how right he was about Jordan Brooks, and I'm going to bow to the master of the Jordan Brooks. And that's all the stoking of Paul's ego I will give tonight. So we'll get that out of the way quick. Kraig, how you doing tonight, brother?
I'm doing well. Pretty good for a Monday. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good for a Monday. It was sunny today, so I hear we're supposed to get like 3 days of rain down this way. So I was enjoying as much outside as I can. Paul, how you doing, brother?
Yeah, about the same. Good for a Monday. We start actually drafting talent. So yeah, it's a good day.
We're not playing mock anymore. Now this is the real deal. It is rookie draft season, so that's always fun. I don't know how you guys feel. I want to give you a few minutes to just kind of talk about your feelings of the draft. I'm going to say that from the offensive side, I liked a lot of landing spots. From the defensive side, I really was saddened by so many of the landing spots. And, you know, some of the top guys I still think are still going to stay the top guys because they fit in real well where they went, you know. But after that, it really was kind of a crapshoot. I mean, you have to kind of project long term on some of the guys. And I was like, ugh. I'll leave them out, let somebody else take the chance, and I'll just draft the guys I know I like, and then trade the pick if there's no one there I want. But Paul, what did you think about the draft this year, and not only that, but you know, kind of landing spots overall? How do you feel now that it's over?
Yeah, no, I felt the same. I mean, think about it and name me a running back who landed poorly. You can't think of one. I mean, you can argue Swift, and I will argue against Swift, but you're still drafting him top half of the first round. I mean, if it's a super flex, maybe you push him back another 3-4 spots, but
he's still a first.
Defense, yeah, I mean, he's a first, and he landed horribly. Defensively, it's a lot shallower. I mean, there are really about 5 to maybe 10 that you're looking at, and then after that, it's, well, I hope he starts. This team's horrible, so maybe he gets snaps, and I'm just going to say sackles early on to insult myself from last week.
So how about you, Kraig? How'd you feel about the draft and everything that happened?
For guys that I sort of had as top talent that I was hoping would go to a good spot, you know, I maybe had 12 or 13 of those go to positions that I liked. There were a couple that I wasn't as high on that went to good positions that I had to go back and look back a little bit today, but it was mainly, for me, linebackers and then D-backs went to places that I like. There wasn't, you know, beyond maybe one or two, a lot of D linemen that went somewhere that I had ranked high pre-draft that went to places that held their value after the draft for me. So I'm kind of in the same ballpark as you guys looking at this the day after, a few days after now.
Yeah. When we hit our rankings over the weekend and tried to get them updated for the site this morning, shameless plug, rotoheat.com, Kraig and I have our IDP rankings up there, rookies and the overall with the rookies. I was disappointed. I was like, well, there's one defensive lineman I'm interested in drafting this year, and if I don't get him as my first D lineman, I guess I'll just go with what I've got. You know, the only other defensive lineman that I even have remote interest in is a guy I didn't like pre-draft, and Javon Kinlaw. You know, he kind of fills the Buckner role in San Fran, and if he can produce even remotely close to Buckner, when you have to start a D tackle, he could be pretty solid if he can develop. I mean, there's a lot of things about his game I just wasn't excited about. So when I got done with it, I was like, wow, linebackers and, yeah, like you said, D-backs are really about the only thing I'm interested in drafting this year, unless I get that first IDP pick, which, you know, it depends on the league you're in, if that's going to be 2-1, 2-5, somewhere in that range. I know I saw a couple of guys mention that they were going to be drafting Chase Young kind of late first, and I went, ooh, I would wait. Just let somebody else do that if they're going to do that, and I would hit because of the way the offensive guys fell. There's so many nice offensive players that you could fill the first round easily before you start considering your IDP guys. But that being said, Paul, obviously we knew Chase Young was going to Washington. What does that do for you? I'm assuming you still feel the same way about it.
Might want to take that comment back, Brad. Ask Paul where he was convinced he
Too
was
soon.
Well, I remember him mentioning somebody. Off the top of my head, I couldn't remember who. So I was just making sure he knew that it was going where he was supposed to go.
Yeah, I'll pat you guys on that one. I had Simmons going second overall, and he went from landing awesome to landing horribly. Yeah, Young, he's gonna get sacks. I like what they have in Allen, Sweat, Payne, Ioannidis. I don't know if they re-sign all of them moving forward, but he's gonna be on a team that's gonna be out there a lot because Trashkins, and yes, I made that up probably about an hour ago, is horrible. So they'll be on the field frequently, and he has enough natural skill to get 10 sacks a season. I think the floor is Clowney. Like I said, was it last week or the week before? I don't think he shows the effort running downwise, but he's got absolutely elite pass rush. He's just awesome. So I don't know. What did you guys think about Washington there?
Kraig?
It's kind of, where, like you said, Brad, most of us expected him to go. And it really is going to be a rotational thing where you're banking on the long term, like Paul said. A lot of these guys, Allen and Ioannidis anyway, they have an out after the next year or two where they can get out with, I think after this year, Allen has a fifth-year option that they can take for him. And then Ioannidis, they have an out after this year. Otherwise, he's cheap for a couple more years. So it'll remain to be seen how they play that out with all that young talent. But I have to assume that he's going to be starting and playing quite a few snaps sooner rather than later. It's just, do you want to pay and then wait a little bit, or let someone else take that risk of maybe he doesn't play as much and he's much more in a rotation than people thought?
Well, and when I thought about it after, and I looked at the roster, how do you guys feel about when I tried to think about kind of what I would expect from him this year? Kind of Josh Allen Jaguars numbers. Probably get a decent amount of snaps because he's probably going to be doing like 60 to 70% of the snaps. Get a decent amount of TFLs, probably a decent amount of tackles. If we're a person trying to project what we expect from this year, do you guys feel comfortable thinking that because he's more talented than Josh Allen? I mean, just natural talent, and the scheme is a good fit for him. But he came into a very similar situation where there was some talent ahead of him, some guys that had been there for a while. How do you feel about kind of projecting him in that type of range, or do you guys think he's going to blow Josh Allen out of the water, or maybe even be less than Josh Allen because Ron Rivera just likes to rotate a bunch of guys in? Like, what do you think, Paul?
I think that Allen's ahead of him still, and not only because Washington has more options on the outside, but I just think that Allen, he doesn't take snaps off, and Young takes snaps off. I think Allen is. You can make an argument. It's not a good one, but you can make an argument that Allen's the top available defensive lineman in the NFL. Like I said, it's not a good argument, but I can see it. And you have seen it in the NFL. But Young's someone I own, and you would have to give me a first for him if the scoring setup says, hey, we're promoting defensive end for him.
Yeah. Kraig, what do you think?
I'm kind of in that same boat where I think there's just more talent and better talent overall than what Allen walked into. They had Yannick, but they didn't have a whole lot beyond that as far as defensive line talent on the Jaguars, and even just the defense as a whole behind it wasn't as good. So I see Allen probably being sort of a best case scenario, unless there's injuries where he's thrust into more playing time than we expect in Washington. I mean, if he somehow manages to get to more playing time, if they trade one of these other guys or something, who knows? Certainly I could see him doing much more than that if you're in a big play sort of league where those tackles for a loss, sacks, all that get you more points. But in just sort of standard scoring for what people call it more balanced with the playing time I think that he's going to be getting, I think he'd have a good rookie season if he got Josh Allen numbers.
I think so. I mean, and but with his talent, I would like to hope that he's capable of doing that. I mean, the only thing I would think that would hinder him from doing that is what Rivera does with him.
Yeah.
It's hard to project because sometimes Rivera is willing to play his rookies early and often. This year, I worry about all the rookies because some of the teams aren't doing OTA type activities. Like I know Saints just said, hey, get yourself into shape, show up at training camp. I mean, like, hopefully you're giving them a playbook so they're studying. I mean, obviously we don't know how in depth they went, but so I have a little concern that maybe rookies this year take a little bit longer to catch on, and maybe it's half a season before they're really up to go and ready, or or something of the like. But okay, well, seeing as I know mine and Craig's rankings, Paul, who is your number 2 now that everything is said and done?
Are we saying end or overall?
Just overall. We can just talk overall today.
Oh, overall, it's almost a 1 through 3 for me, and it's kind of what you want. But I will go say Murray is my number 1 overall. I know I didn't have him in the top 10 when we did that
A couple
2 weeks
ago.
ago,
Yeah.
but I didn't expect Simmons to land as horribly as he did, and Murray landed in a spot where they finally cleared out all the clutter around him. I mean, they have been just using whatever they can find at the position, and now they have someone who's supremely talented, and he's going to see the field every snap that they can throw him out there for. And I don't think that the Chargers are in the, hey, we like you, but we're not going to throw you out there so that we protect you. I don't think that they're that smart at any position. I'm not saying that they should, would, or whatever, but that they're just going to throw him out there for every snap. And not that I say, hey, the first year's the be-all, end-all or anything, but they're going to throw him out there for every conceivable snap of his contract and move on. With it, he's going to get solos, sacks. They have a solid front four. Not awesome. I wasn't a Tillery fan up the middle, but what they have on the outside is just awesome. He's going to get lots of solos.
Yeah, he should get a ton of action, and shout out to CXK over on YouTube. He's one of our faithful that are always with us. You're the man. So I want to go back to Simmons just a little bit because CXK is talking about it. So sacks are 1.75 points in my league. I opted to pass on Chase Young, and he grabbed Isaiah Simmons based on scoring because he has Miles and Bosa already. Because Simmons went to Arizona, the thing for me, I need to see what he's going to be listed as now, because now it's purely, if he's a linebacker, I still feel okay about him. If they put him as a safety, which I'm super terrified they're going to do that because all they have is Buda Baker and Thompson there, I could easily see him losing value in that aspect. But how do you guys feel about that? So at 1.75 for sacks in the league, having Bosa and having Miles, are you okay taking a chance on a guy like Simmons, not knowing obviously his roster makeup? Do you think because of the athleticism he's going to get used to rush the passer in Arizona, Craig? I'll start with you. How do you feel about Simmons?
Based on a little bit of what I've heard from the coaching staff, I think he is sort of going to be used as that, Swiss Army knife where he isn't going to have one set role, especially because they have two people. Hicks last year was just a beast for him overall, and then they went and got Campbell, who had a really nice year, and they paid a good amount of money to. So I can't see him using him just strictly as a linebacker all the time, especially when they can use him in other areas and they need help in other areas. So that designation will matter. I'd be curious if the sacks are only 1.75 points, what the rest of the scoring is like, because, if it's proportional where tackles aren't very much, I could see you going either way. He knows his league better than I do, but if tackles are worth about the same as a sack, then yeah, go for it if that's the position that you have a need for.
Yeah. Paul, what do you think, brother?
He's my third. I can see someone. He's my third guy who I thought, hey, if you drafted him as the first overall defensive, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to think anything else of it. He's probably long term has the highest ceiling, but at least as long as they have Baker, Campbell, and Hicks up the middle, that's a lot of solos that are already soaked up. If he somehow becomes safety eligible, and I just looked at Yahoo, Flea Flicker, and MFL, and he's not. Yeah, it does hurt, but you have to think also he seems like one of those athletes that in the NFL when they're 33, and you look at it and go, yeah, you gave us 8 to 10 years of just solid play. I can't see looking back on it and going, all right, well, you took this other guy over him. What were you thinking? Well,
Yeah.
that can easily happen. It's just, are you going to sit there and go, all right, we're stomaching 3 seasons where it's not going to be overly high, almost like a Shaq Thompson, where it's, hey, we like you, you're a supreme athlete, but you're just not going to be relevant. But then you kind of see it more, and he's becoming someone that you can put him out there not just some weeks, but every week, and just not think about it. So,
Sure.
I don't have a problem with Simmons at all. I just defense is more about landing spot, and he landed really horribly for fantasy right his first year and a half, 2, 3, whatever
potentially. It is. Absolutely. So speaking of horrible landing spots and the fact that there were so many of them this year, Jason has a question. Well, Jason isn't really asking a question, but stating kind of a fact in his league. He doesn't plan on touching IDP until probably the 4th round. How do you guys feel this year's draft? Could you see a potential? Obviously we don't know what the scoring's like, league setup. Could you see a situation where you're just going to ignore IDP until you take a few flyers on some guys that you like? I'll start with you, Paul.
Tim's league. There was a league that Kraig and I had that either folded or almost folded. And you could have had. I wouldn't have selected Simmons at the 4-10 spot because there were only 10 in that league, but I could see not selecting any of them. I can see other leagues that I have where you consider them in the first. I mean, it's all about how many are in here, how many you play, how many guys are completely rostered, what's your scoring setup, how much are they scoring versus your wide receiver 2, for example. I mean, and these are all things that he would know versus I.
Right.
All else equal, I think and no one else is going to get this besides you guys, but either the XFL or the RDOT setup, you're considering these guys at the top of the second. Maybe you don't like what's available, maybe the late first. But yeah, I mean, Kraig and I have had one where it's the middle of the 4th round. You hate it. You're like, all right, fine, I'll take a linebacker.
Yeah, and that's the thing I love and hate at the same time about IDP is because they're based on how there's no every league I'm in has a bit different scoring system and roster makeup, so it's harder to say, okay, these guys are definitely worth X round pick, somewhere in this range. You know, even when I said kind of Chase Young is 2-1 to 2-5, I'm basing it on most of the leagues I use. This is where I would expect to see him go. But you know, it's so hard in IDP where we're in the offensive side. You know what the different systems are, and it's pretty straightforward. IDP, you really have to do your homework. You really have to be prepared because you have to know your league. You have to know how guys draft. You have to be ready for anything, and that's the thing I like, and that's challenging, but I also hate it at the same time. So good statement, Jason. I think it's real interesting. Jason also says he thinks Patrick Queen to Baltimore will be a monster, and we all kind of, sort of already said that a little bit. That we definitely think that's a really good spot for him. But Craig, he is number 3 on our list after Chase Young and Kenneth Murray. How do you feel about Patrick Queen? Although I think he's your 2 and he's my 3, so that's kind of leveled out. But how do you feel about him in Baltimore?
One more thing about Simmons, sorry, I wanted to say
Oh, yeah,
that
go ahead.
I didn't realize Campbell's contract is only a 1-year deal. So if he's gone after this year, that potentially opens up a lot more for Simmons. And especially with the league scoring that CXK was talking about, where tackles are 1.5, interceptions are 6, and sacks are 1.75. I mean, I can see him taking Simmons over Chase Young in that, certainly, with that sort of scoring. Because, again, like you just got done saying, scoring's really different. I haven't seen that sort of scoring before, but in a league like that, I think Simmons probably has more long-term value than Chase Young.
Well, in Arizona's defense, aren't they more? Don't they normally have 4 linebackers on the field pretty regularly? I'd have to pull up snap counts, but I feel like they're
Yeah,
kind of closer to 3-4.
because they have Chandler Jones usually as an outside linebacker. So, yeah.
So if they have Simmons kind of roaming the middle and kind of all over the place, that could be. I mean, he could have a lot of action depending how
Yeah.
quickly he picks it up. Sorry, go
But
ahead. Your thoughts on Queen?
I just took Queen in a league as the first linebacker off the board. I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look. I probably had Murray ahead of him, just a slot ahead going into this. Paul kind of spoke to his feelings on Murray's situation. For me, I don't completely trust that coaching staff on the defensive side. They had one linebacker last year play over 40% of the snaps, and it was Thomas Davis. And besides that, they had a whole bunch of junk, and they also run into injuries a lot over there. Some teams, whether it's the NBA or the NFL or whatever, just seem to be injury prone. Mm-hmm. They can't get guys back from injuries. So I have that concern. It's really close to me, but with a better overall defense around him, I think there's going to be opportunities where he can't be singled out and sort of focused on in terms of blocking schemes and stuff. So I agree with Jason in the chat. I have a feeling Patrick Queen, again, we'll see how people adapt the first year, especially with how, without the rookie seminars and training camps potentially go. But long-term, I like him just a slightly bit more than Murray. And I trust the coaching staff a lot more in Baltimore for what that's worth.
Baltimore produces quality IDP linebackers on a higher level. For me, having Murray at my number 2 in my rankings was purely based on the fact that the Chargers have dumpster fires around him, which means he's got to play. I mean, he hasn't had a huge injury history, and the way that the Chargers play, like he's already their best linebacker. I mean, and with that defensive line in front of him, I'm like, it's got to give him some opportunities to get extra tackles, kind of get over there and do a lot of different things. So that I'm purely basing it on that, and I could easily be stupid for that. Like that could be wrong on me, and we could look back at this time next year and be like, you shouldn't be ranking linebackers because obviously you don't know what you're talking about. Like I wouldn't be the first to say, you know what, I've been wrong before, but I have Murray and Queen, like, they could be interchangeable. They're 2 and 3 for me because I just love where they went. And
Same.
Paul, how do you feel about those guys?
I mean, I'm not a Queen fan, but if I was going to sit there and say, hey, you can land in one spot, he landed in the right spot. He'll be on the field a lot. They do have other backers, but they're more edge. They don't really have anything up the middle. I mean, you're honestly looking at it and going, all right, well, you're on the inside, and the other one's going to be Malik Harrison. Like, I know that that's not how it shakes up the first week of the season, just because of this whole COVID, and they can't
They'll be behind.
They can't see anybody, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's what they're throwing out there the 6th week, and just like, hey guys, they have more speed than everyone else. Okay, yeah, I'm not a Queen fan. You guys are. I'm a Murray fan. You guys aren't as high as I am. We'll see how it shakes out. I mean, I played Davis for most of last year, and he was beyond serviceable, and he was 846 years old. So we'll see how Murray ends up.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. I mean, for me, when I looked back, because typically when I'm watching the NFL draft, I'm creating a spreadsheet, literally every one of the 256 picks, so I can kind of analyze not only spots, but what they have there, maybe kind of try to project snap counts, things like that. And when I was looking through, I'm like, oh my gosh, 90% of the draft went to places I didn't want them to go. Like, they just seem weird in the fit. So when I was looking through it, I moved up guys I hadn't rated highly. Jordan Brooks will be the one I continue to bang. Like, I did not have him in my top 10. He is now at number 5 for me. Like, he went to a perfect spot to use his skill set to be productive in that defense. Like, they needed him, and I didn't realize they needed him until they drafted him, and I went, oh, that's perfect. So I went back through, and most of the guys after, like I was telling you guys before the show, after pick 10, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, like, these, I'm ranking it based on kind of what I liked about the player before the draft, because I don't really love where 11 through 50 went, So after these two, we have Isaiah Simmons in our Roto Heat rankings. And we've all kind of talked a little bit about it. We don't love the Cardinal spot. I'm interested to see what they do with him, from a football perspective, because he can play all over the place. When they kept showing the graphics of his snap percentages in college, he played just as many snaps in the nickel as he did, as a linebacker. And I mean, it's just crazy to think about that. At the NFL level, he's probably not going to get away with that much, because slot receivers in the NFL are probably going to be able to beat him, I would think, because athleticism only gets you so far in the NFL. But Kraig, we have Simmons at 4 on our rankings. How do you feel about that, and what's your takeaway that we haven't already talked about with him?
From a pure fantasy dynasty perspective, long term, I like the landing spot, and that I trust how they are creative on the offensive side of the ball through necessity with having someone like Kyler Murray, and they put guys around him to succeed. I think they're going to do the same thing on the defensive side of the ball with Simmons. I think it just, with the situation that he goes into off the bat, it might take a little bit more time to get the production that you're going to want.
Yeah.
It all depends. Can you just sit back and wait for that production for a few years? Then, yeah, you probably do take him higher. If not, you might be looking at one of these other guys instead. But, talent-wise, like Paul had, I mean, he was the number 1 guy or number 2 to Chase Young, depending on how you want to put linebacker versus defensive line.
Absolutely. Paul?
Yeah, he's a queen, like you said before. You can move him all over the field very quickly. Also on Brooks, not to be like, hey, this is the Jordan Brooks show or anything, but you're not going to see it this year.
Mm-hmm.
But name me a spot where he lands and you go, besides the Ravens, that you sit there and go, I like this. That Seattle D, they funnel everything inside, and he is super fast. And yes, he has some things that he has to get in his head. Name me a position group besides Seattle that is any smarter up the middle of the field than what they have, and what's going to sit there and go, hey, watch for this, you do this, watch this. There isn't a smarter group in the league.
Yeah,
Wagner is talented. He's also maybe the smartest one in the league. Now that Kuechly's not there, Wright is slow, and he's an all pro like every third year. He's just ridiculously smart. And now you have someone that has talent that gets to soak this all in. He you could make an argument that he's the fourth overall defensive asset for me, and I wouldn't have a like okay.
Yeah, when you brought up Brooks a couple weeks back, I with as excited as you were about him, I said, okay, let me look back a little bit, so I pulled up a little bit of tape and I started digging in, and there were two spots that I thought kind of in the back of my mind made sense for him, and they were both 4-3 type teams with Seattle and Philadelphia. Philly didn't really see that they needed a guy, but if he went there, I'd have been like, okay, I like how Jim Schwartz uses linebackers, so I'd have been okay with that, and that would have made me like him more. So it was a perfect spot. I mean, he's going to not only are Wagner and Wright getting old, but he'll have enough time with them to understand the game and understand how they dissect the game and soak that in before they are moved on. And as long as he can use the talent and marry that with the thinking and the smarts about it, he should be a really good IDP player for the next 10 years. I mean, easily. So it's definitely a good situation. We have him at 5 on our Roto Heat rankings because I couldn't talk myself into a reason to put him ahead of any of the other guys. Queen would have been the only one where I would have argued that. I've been okay with having that argument pre-draft, but going to Baltimore, I'm like, man, Baltimore linebackers. I mean, and they had nothing to, there's not like there's a lot of competition there. I mean, if CJ Mosley was still there, then I said, yes, there's competition, but he's not. He hasn't been there in 2 years now. So
I would not outright select Brooks ahead of him just because of what everyone else thinks. But I would rather have Brooks a round after and just move on.
Craig, how do you feel about Brooks?
Oh,
sorry.
I can see it either way. Go ahead. Yeah. I'm done.
Well, he's your boy, so I'll make sure you get ample opportunity to bang that drum. Craig, what do you think about him?
Yeah, I think pre-draft, and this is probably from talking to Paul more than you do on a daily basis. I probably had Brooks a little bit higher than you did, and he still moved up in my rankings too. You guys talked about that a lot. The only other guy that I moved up, and I know you didn't move him up as high, but we didn't really talk about him at all before, was Willie Gay over in KC. I mean, I thought his landing spot was, talk about a guy that we didn't talk about to being, a top 6 or 7, linebacker pick in a draft. He went to a great position there where they don't have a whole lot. Yeah, they have Hitchens. It's sort of their main guy. But speaking as a Cowboys fan, he's nothing amazing. He's just sort of
He's a guy.
To comp it to someone that you had a lot of experience with, he's sort of like a Tahir Whitehead, where you can trust him and, he'll get you some stats, but he's nothing amazing and he's not going to shatter the world for you. So I really like that position. I probably could have flipped him, and maybe it was that someone knew that I hadn't thought about as much and, moved him up a spot higher. But sort of like we talked about the other two, I have those guys sort of as interchangeable. I don't know that I'm going to be getting him anywhere because a lot of the places where I'm going to be in the range to take a linebacker in leagues, I'm probably going to take one sooner than that because this year it seems like across the board I don't have a whole lot of back-end picks for those sort of guys that I normally would take. But if I can get him off the waivers somewhere in some league where linebackers matter, I certainly like to stash him and see if he pans out because I think he has the talent to pan out there in that spot.
Yeah, when you look at what's ahead of him, I mean, it's just guys, Damian Wilson, Anthony Hitchens. I mean, they're just guys. Like, they're veterans that know the system, So he should easily sneak up and be startable, if not taking snap. I mean, because the toughest thing for him is not punching anybody out. Like, he needs to keep his hands to himself unless it's the opposing team that he's tackling, So as long as he gets the NFL and matures and respects the game and stops being a knucklehead, he'll be fine. Which is kind of why I had him lower on my rankings, just because I'm nervous about that. Like, he's had problems most of his career. I just don't I'm not going to invest a lot in him until I see that he's until he's not doing that. And I normally, injury-prone guys are the only ones I ever tend to knock. His character concerns are high. Like that aggression, that anger. Like I know a lot of guys that are very angry and don't know how to keep their mouth shut and get themselves into trouble that way. Like if he can't keep his mouth shut and just do his job, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
So I'll let somebody else take him, but I love the talent. Like in KC, he should have no problem using his ability to become a starter this year because those other guys are just guys.
Yep.
On the flip side of that, I hated him because of I thought that his eyes were not very good, and yes, he is super fast, but he takes forever to get up to speed seeing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't have anything there. I can easily see him as a top 24 option this year, just because they don't have a lot, and because the offense scores so quickly that the defense is out there a lot. Again, almost on a flip side of like Jaguars, and we like Schobert because he's always going to be on the field.
Mm-hmm.
Gay is going to be on the field a lot because the offense scores fast.
Right.
And I don't think that everyone is up to, hey, I don't want him because I'll have some of these other options. You can consider Gay at around 6. And if you have one of those and everyone looks at you and goes, yeah, it's round 6, I don't want this, I'll gladly select him.
It doesn't hurt to take a flyer, especially later in the draft if you can.
Yeah. And he's got more upside than similar tier players for me, like Malik Harrison, or was it Jordan Phillips, the guy who went to LSU?
Jacob
Phillips.
Yep.
Yeah. Gay just has so much more upside. I mean, Chase on, but he doesn't have the ceiling that Gay has, and for round 5, 6, or 7, I'm all over that, despite the fact that I think he's not good at all.
Yeah. So next up on our list is one of the guys that kind of jumped the farthest based on last month's rankings. At 6, we have Grant Delpit. He is another one that I think probably went to the best possible spot because of the exodus that Cleveland did in their safety room. Delpit should easily be able to get himself a starter position if he even just remotely shows the talent that he had. I think the issue if I remember correctly, my issue with him was he just needed to become a better tackler. I think he had trouble with angles on tackles, if I remember correctly. But he was a playmaker, so if he can just kind of be the free safety and roam the field, he might be able to get you a nice amount of interceptions over his career. Craig, what do you think about Grant Delpit? I know that you have him at 8 and I have him at 6 on our individual rankings.
Yeah, I have him as my second D-back. A lot of it was landing spot. He was a guy that had been talked about for a long time by the talking heads as a potential first-round pick. Turns out the D-backs, there were a couple of cornerbacks. Actually, there were more cornerbacks than I had expected, but cornerbacks seemed to be more the priority over the safety class. And we had talked about pre-draft, how there was sort of a cluster of them that you thought maybe the end of the first and the second round, and that's usually how it panned out for those bigger names that we were talking about. But, yeah, the opportunity is certainly there. He's got a couple good cornerbacks there and not much else for safety. So not much in front of him in terms of linebackers equals more tackle opportunities too, because we're going to have to see how Mac Wilson and we just talked about him. Was it
Jacob
Phillips? Yeah. Both of those guys are going to have opportunities to prove themselves, but they are unproven to this point. Wilson did play last year, and he was a big name coming out of college, but hasn't proven in the NFL either. So, up the middle on that defense, once you get past the defensive line, there could be a lot of opportunities. So I agree with the reason for why he got moved up.
Yeah. Paul, what do you think about Delpit in Cleveland?
I didn't rank them overall, but I did a short list here, and yeah, he's probably 6 for me also. Greedy is lazy tackling. and I can see him just being like, all right, I'll soak those solos up. And you don't really throw at Ward, so I can see him getting a lot of tackles. I mean,
up.
yeah, I mean, I know he misses some, but I don't want him in center field either. He's almost like a Peppers, that you have him out there because he is so talented, but he's not good where you say, all right, we're playing you at this one specific spot and doing this one thing. He's always going to be on the field. It's just a matter of how. And they're not good enough up the middle where he doesn't have elite upside, at least from a fantasy perspective, not from an actual football perspective. But once we get behind this, there's not. I would rather have Delpit any than anything else we haven't discussed yet, and it's not really close.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. You know, some of the guys that we have, I mean, even just after him, it's going to take some time to see if the value is really there, and if they can develop. You know, obviously we saw some traits we liked, so we moved them up. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see kind of how it all plays out. You know, I know, and even the next guy on our list is the second D lineman that we have ranked, and that's Javon Kinlaw to the 49ers. And we both kind of have them very similar. You know, um, he's one of those guys that when I first saw the pick, I was like, well, you just traded him to Indianapolis. Like, why didn't you just keep Buckner? And I'm like, well, Buckner's going to cost you a lot of money, so maybe I guess I could see, yeah, exactly. Paul's got it. It's going to cost you money, and you can get younger and still have a lot of that upside. You know, so I said, okay, so maybe I need to think about Kinlaw a little different because pre-draft, I think I had him outside the top 10 if I remember correctly. I don't think I was as high on him. So, Craig, what do you think about Kinlaw and the 49ers? You know, do you think he kind of could fit into the role like Buckner had, where he had some very startable weeks as a D tackle?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to wait to see what you have in him long term because that defensive line is already so loaded. But that will also help him if he is good enough to get on the field, which you'd think he would be, being a first round pick and a high pick by him. You know, put him out there. They're not going to be able to focus on him. He's not going to be one of the main, probably two guys, three guys, and you're counting linebackers, it gets even higher that they're focusing on. So he's going to have an opportunity to get in there, tackles for a loss, even if he's not getting the sacks, some of those solos where I think there's a lot of opportunity. It's just, is he going to capitalize on it? But that big opportunity in front of him with a lot of good talent to learn from, I think that's why you see the jump in the rankings by us.
Yeah. Paul, what do you think about Kinlaw?
I was a huge fan of it. Everything you guys had said before. They only traded Buckner because of future salary behind him. Kinlaw, I had his top 10-ish if he slid right out of there. Okay, fine, just because they wanted other positions. Okay, that's fine. I can easily see him here at 7, especially if you're playing a defensive tackle specific. He should be first. If you want to take Brown just because of the floor, okay, I'm taking Kinlaw over him, but that's more sack heavy leagues. I thought it was absolutely funny that gambling on Frisco's first. If you took defense over offense, it paid a plus 250. So for every 100 that you bet, if you take defense, you would get 350 back at the end of it. And I just went, so they moved him. They need corner and they need help up the middle. I put some money on that, and it hit. I just didn't see all the receiver talk that everyone thought, but I put 3 figures on that, and thank you.
That's awesome. I mean, they still got their receiver. It just wasn't that first pick.
Yeah.
And they went with a receiver that makes no sense to me. But whatever, they can have him.
Oh, that makes complete sense.
I don't like the player. I mean, I get what they were doing, but I just don't like him.
He fits their system as a flanker only. Someone, he's like a Fuller in Houston. He doesn't help you in fantasy, but he helps you win actual football games. It just opens things up because they already have Kittle in the middle, Debo's in the middle. They don't need someone else. They don't need CD over the middle of the field,
Right.
Judy over the middle of the field. They need someone that you can go, hey, we're throwing it 45 yards. I know it's not a high percentage, but we need someone who makes it higher percentage than it should be. All right, here you go. So also the Debo Samuel owners are probably watching that going, wait, so they selected receiver who actually helps me. Awesome.
I know. As a Debo owner, I was perfectly fine with it because I knew that Debo was safe. Like he was still going to, have good value. So I was definitely fine with it. Okay, so next up after Delpit in our after Kinlaw in our rankings, this one we're a little bit more different on how we feel. He's outside of Craig's top 10, but he's up in my top 10. But he's actually the biggest mover in our top 10. He actually moved up 10 spots, nonetheless. Jeremy Chin from the Panthers. He literally is walking into a starting spot because their safety group is a dumpster fire. I mean, Trey Boston, they'll make the starter, but he's just not he's not a guy that I'm excited about. Chin, I like the talent, kind of a smaller school guy that I thought could develop. I'm drafting him here for 2 years down the road. I'm not really drafting him in the top 10 for this year because I just don't know if he's ready. I think he's going to look out of place more often than not. I feel like personally this season, but I like the upside with him kind of long term, especially with kind of the weaker safety class. If you were looking for depth at safety and you wanted to try to find a guy that you might be able to get some spot play out of, maybe bye week fill in, and then in a few years he might be ready to be kind of in the conversation for your starter. I think Chin fits in really nicely. But I'll start with you, Craig. I know he's at 11 on your rankings. How do you feel about Chin? Not only this year but long term. Is he somebody you're willing to invest in? And what do you think about the player?
I probably won't end up with him in many leagues. I mean, and when I say that, it should be clear. I'm only in, I think, 4 leagues right now anyway, because I had to cut back a lot from kids. So, 2 would be a lot of 4. But, he's my 3rd defensive back, so I think he's my 3rd anyway, looking at this. I don't have a problem with him at all. I like the spot that he went into. He's going to be, like you said, for all intents and purposes, unless something crazy happens, a starter where there should be a lot of opportunities because, again, if you look at what's in front of him, there's Shaq Thompson. There's a good defensive line. There's one really good linebacker that you pretty much want, and then a whole lot of not much in the secondary, too. They did go defensive heavy. I think they went all defense in Carolina this draft. For some reason, I think I read that. Heavy. So, it's going to be a young team. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be stuff to clean up on the back end. So I certainly see, he could end up with, if he is starting, the highest production out of those safeties this year. So, with a lot of these guys, I don't have, for like my top 3 at a position or so, usually a huge amount of difference. I just didn't like him as much as Delpit, which was a lot as far as landing spot, because he does have that, older defensive line with some more experience that's going to be having better play. Linebackers, you can call it about even, but the secondary around Delpit's a lot better, where, they're not going to be necessarily throwing at those guys, where you can sort of pick your poison where you want to throw the ball against the Panthers and have about an equal shot.
For sure. Paul, how do you feel about Chin?
You had a hitter only type. Was the number 7 safety overall last year in Reed. Mm-hmm. And Chin basically walks in and says, yeah, I play here now. I mean, I don't know if I see number 7 overall, but he's definitely someone that you can throw out there and go, all right, like I'm not going to be completely hurt by this, even the first year or we'll say the second year because of like I said or like we said before, we don't know what this class how far behind that they are, but yeah, I would feel fine with him as someone that you draft in the 5th or 6th round of your leagues.
Okay. All right. So after Chin, we got another safety at 9 in our rankings. We got Xavier McKinney, who went to the Giants, and another guy that probably should be a starter probably from day one. I mean, they got Peppers there, who will probably play next to him. But Peppers is a guy. I think he's a better football player than a fantasy asset. Paul, I'll start with you on this one. How do you feel about McKinney in the Giants system and long term?
I'm not as much of a fan of him because I think he plays center field only, and for as bad as they are, I don't see that as being good. That I want to throw him out there. I would rather have Chin or Duggar than McKinney, but he's going to see the field because they drafted him like mid-30s somewhere in there, so he's going to see the field. Peppers is going to get all the underneath solos that get missed. I'm not as much of a fan. I wasn't as much of a fan of him in the actual draft, and I'm not a fan of him in fantasy. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
Craig?
I think I have him as my 4th. And, it's sort of like a similar situation we just talked about where defensive line there is pretty good. You have one linebacker who is going to be able to make plays and get a lot of solos, but the rest of it is a lot of yuck. But that secondary isn't too bad. I mean, they got 2 good corners. Peppers, like I said, for NFL purposes, is another good safety that he's going to. So there'll be a little bit of competition, but I'm sort of with Paul where I thought, and what do I know, but for fantasy-wise, what I was seeing is not as much production out of him. I just wasn't as big of a fan of him. And his landing spot to me was just sort of, all right. I don't have a problem with it, but I'm not going to be going out trying to get him. If he would fall to me in the late round somehow in a league, I'd probably take him to see if he pans out, but I'm never expecting, world-beating numbers out of him over where the Giants currently have.
Yeah, it's hard to look at safeties from Bama and get excited. It seems like they're all very similar when they come out, and they never really become super sexy IDP assets that I can think of. Just trying to think back the last few years of them. Who do you got?
Landon Collins is
Collins.
super sexy.
Yeah, Collins would be it. For some reason, I didn't think of him. I was thinking of other guys. But Collins is about the only. Oh yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. That there has been a lot of, hey, this guy's awesome. All SEC, all. Yeah, he went in the 3rd round. He sucks. Goodbye.
Well, there's a lot of those guys that ended up being similar in recent history. I mean, Roman Harper was sort of like that too. Mark Barron, couldn't even stick it at safety. He had to move to linebacker where he isn't getting the playing time. He isn't as good as they expected him to be. Rashad Johnson, who I think might still be on the Cardinals.
Yeah.
But you're not getting excited about having him either. So, it's Landon Collins and a lot of guys that are probably better NFL players than fantasy players. Not that there's anything wrong with that. They're not drafting them to get us fantasy points. But
right. Yeah, very true. Okay, so at our 10 spot now we have a guy that pre-draft I thought maybe somebody would draft him as a DN, but the Jaguars took him as a linebacker. Kayvon Chason. He's at 10 in our rankings, and it's really only because I think he's going to be on the field more than some of the other guys. But with Miles Jack, with Joe Scobert, I don't think he's going to get a ton of action. Like, they sit in nickel packages 50-60% of the time, and he's not going to be on the field for that. I'll start with you, Paul, because I know that you're super excited about Caleb on by the hand movements. So what do you think about Spot? Obviously I knew you weren't super high on the player, period, but what's your take on him?
He's a speed rusher only. That yes, he will be on the field for first down, second down, and for third down. The problem is, how many TFLs is this guy going to end up with? And even when we had the defensive line ranks, which obviously he's a backer, so he's not going to have that. Your complete upside that you're looking at is like DeMarcus Lawrence, and he's listed as an end. And if that's your complete upside, but you move that over to backer, you're looking at someone who, I mean, it's all about your scoring format, but I don't really want to put him out there in any sort of a balanced scoring. I have him listed on the sheet just because I knew we'd discuss him, but he will be a zero share player for me, and I have no interest in adding. I have 10 guys I would rather have over him.
Yeah, I mean, even the guy that we have just behind him at 11, Willie Gay, I think I would probably consider over him, even though, Willie Gay's got character concerns. But Craig, what do you feel? How do you feel about Chase Arm?
I'll probably not have any shares of him either, in so far as that I'm not someone that usually drafts a lot of those big play linebackers. My leagues don't really have that scoring for the most part, and I think that's what he's going to be. Like, I think that's his cap in the NFL, especially in the position that he's at currently. If your league rewards those sort of stats, yeah, take a chance on him, in the third or fourth round, because that's probably where you'd have to get him based on his draft capital, depending on how high your IDPs go. But I just wasn't excited about him pre-draft, and I was less excited due to where he went in the draft as far as what team he went to. Could he turn out to be a great pass rushing outside linebacker? Sure. I guess I'm just not expecting it based on what I've seen from him. I was very happy he didn't go to the Cowboys. I'll put it that way. Where he would have been a defensive end, and to me he would have had more value, kind of like you said, on a team as a defensive end. But be as it is, he's in Jacksonville now, and I think he's around 14 for me. I think.
Yeah. Well, and you guys were saying TFLs and big plays. Josh Allen's going to get there before he does. I mean, Josh Allen's just a better overall athlete. I mean, he could get around the corner quicker. I mean, that's the thing for me when I thought about it more. I was like, well, Chase Allen's going to have a hard time getting a lot of that backfield action because there's some decent pieces ahead of him that I think have just as much athletic ability that'll get there just as quickly, if not faster.
Yeah.
So to end the show, I want to ask you guys just kind of guys we haven't talked about that you're excited about. But I want to hit on one more guy because Craig has him in his top 10 and I don't. But I want him to talk through it, and that's Antoine Winfield Jr. went to the Bucs. It looks like you have him at like 7 in your rankings. And tell me what you love about him, and let's talk about Winfield.
So does it necessarily translate to anything? No, but I do pay attention to it. The pedigree, where he came from with his father, sort of growing up around it. The guy was a complete professional, had a long career in the league, so he learned, I'm assuming, and from his college play, it appears so, from his dad, what it takes to be a productive, smart player. He doesn't get caught out of position. He knows what he's doing. You look at the college tape from him. He was my top-ranked safety going into this, and I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to remember, and it seems like it was a month ago that we did those, even though it was like a week ago that stuff was finished. But
yeah,
in the position that he went
ranked.
to, the position that he went to, I mean, we talked about, where these guys went. I love seeing him in Tampa because that secondary to me has been wholly unimpressive for the past few years. There's a lot of guys that I've even had a cup of tea with. Whitehead I've had on my team, Evans I've had on my team, Edwards I had in the league last year, and a lot of it was, all right, these guys have opportunity because of injuries for a while there. One of the three was always injured, or the other guys there got injured. And they would have a couple good games and then fall off, and was sort of, roulette in terms of which guy is going to go off week to week and who's even going to get the playing time. But when he went there, knowing that backfield, defensive backfield, sort of needs a captain, I think just he's the perfect guy to be back there, not get out of place, and get those tackles for him for the stuff that gets behind him. I know Paul has a concern over the defensive. Not defensive linemen, the linebackers in front of him. And there very well could be fewer tackles because of that. And Jameis not throwing the ball all over the place and keeping the defense on the field more. He'll be doing that to the Saints defense in the practice. But I love the position and I love the player, so I couldn't really be happier with where he went.
Yeah, and that was kind of the struggle I had when I was looking back at it. It was like, as much as I like Antoine Winfield's dad and what he did for the Vikings all those years, I liked Edwards and Evans, and I thought just because of the kind of the injuries, like you mentioned, they had over last year, so like, well, maybe they still get the shot. Maybe Winfield's kind of security blanket just in case because he's a pretty healthy dude. Yeah, I had such a hard time kind of going back and forth, and I was like, I'll move him down my rankings for now, and as time goes on, obviously maybe I'll update it if I was wrong. I like the individual. I just don't know how he fits with, and and looking at the linebackers and even the defensive line ahead of him, they've got a nice defensive line. I mean, I know Sue is old, and obviously Golston isn't young either, but they've got a decent offensive line, but their linebackers are just studs. I mean, across the board, they're all really good. So I could see where Paul's coming at. But Paul, talk about kind of how you feel about that. Let's hear your hatred for all things Winfield.
Kraig thought that by mentioning Winston and interceptions that he'd wipe the smile off my face. However, on the flip side, there's also another defensive guy there who basically won me a ship last year because he was horrible, but he got a lot of solos, and that was Carlton Davis. So I appreciate you reminding me of that, and that's for someone who will never listen to this show, Johnny. Yes, you do suck at fantasy football. Anyway,
Jeff will send him the link. Don't worry.
He's actually listening while making himself
I heard him back there.
Some healthy food. I think he plays too much of center field for me in fantasy. I would much rather take a shot on Duggar, just because I think that could be a team that selects first overall, and you want defensive assets on those teams. I'm not saying he plays every position right out of the gate, but he has elite upside, and I actually have Duggar as my top safety. And it's not the floor, it's the ceiling for him. He's super fast, tackles. He plays on someone we think is going to be very bad. We're hoping. I mean, the hoodie's got magic powers, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm not a Winfield fan. I would rather own Duggar. But if it's actual football, I can see how Winfield is someone who sits in the middle third and just says, "This is my area, get out," and that's fine. And that's a valuable position for actual football.
So is Duggar going to see the field anytime soon?
We'll see.
That was my concern with him. Was like, how many years before the guy's going to get an opportunity to get some real significant playing time?
Yeah, and I can see that, but that's also the McCourty. Are they twins?
Yeah,
they're
all 70 years old. So
yeah, they're like 84. And honestly, if they start the year 1-7, they're just going to go, all right, hey, we appreciate you. We're paying you through the end of the season, but get out. We're playing the young guy. Like I said, I'm not saying this is a floor selection. This is a ceiling selection. And if I'm in a spot where I'm in the hunt, then maybe I do select Delpit over him just because of the floor. But if it's one of the orphans I have where I inherited the worst franchises I could find, Duggar is my selection all day long.
Okay.
How do you guys feel about Kraig? How do you feel about him?
I like him. It was just that concern of, Belichick lately hasn't gotten a whole lot out of rookies just playing, period. And I don't think that, and this is just my pure speculation, I don't think he's going to have them give up on the season. I mean, I think he's still going to have them, especially the players they have in that defense, fighting for, trying to fight for anyway, a division or a wild card spot. I don't think they're going to go the tanking route. So, I don't see him having a whole lot this current year. Clearly, they like him with what they invested in him. One of those, I don't know if he was their first pick, but a top pick that they had in that second round. They like him, and I like the player. I was looking a lot at what Brad did for this year, and I don't see him getting a lot of playing time. So that's the question: how long do you want to sit on him? He very well could be the top safety in this group because once those guys, Chung isn't a spring chicken back there either, although Belichick seems to, just love bringing him back every other year to play for him. So there isn't going to be a whole lot left once those guys go. So.
Well, and I could see that, when it comes to like guys like this, I could easily see him being out on the waiver wire next year and things start moving around and they obviously these guys are getting older that maybe they don't bring him back. He would be a guy I would think is a kind of a priority try to add at some point in the offseason. But if we're drafting, I'm going to look at a different position and just kind of let him go unless he falls far enough where I'm like, okay, the value matches up with where I'm willing to take a risk on him. Player's great, opportunity questionable, at least for the foreseeable future. But Paul, are there any other guys that we haven't mentioned that you think need to be brought up about guys that you're really excited about in this draft? Kind of guys that you would think somewhere in your 10 range or so.
If you're playing a tackle specific league, I think that Brown has to be second. I'm not a huge fan of his just because I don't think he has the ceiling, but he's someone that you can throw out there and he'll get a couple solos, and frankly that's all you really need from that position. He's not someone I'd be looking at high. Like I said, this is for tackle specific only leagues. And I was super high on, was it Yetur?
Oh, Yetur Gross Matos? Yeah.
Yeah, Matos. He has Landry upside, Harold Landry level upside, and he's listed as a defensive end. I think the separate, he's the only other end who I can realistically see that we look at and go, all right, you're someone who I want versus someone who I'm going, all right, well, who might get a sack this week, and you pick them off the scrap heap. I'm not saying that it's a for sure, but he's pretty clearly someone that should be mentioned.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me, and I probably won't touch a lot of Panthers linemen at this point until I see what they're doing. From what I hear, they're going to kind of try to deploy a 3-4 more predominantly with Matt Rule, and I don't know how that works for either of those guys' value. Like Derek Brown, if we get Derek Brown from last year where he's got the motor on and he's working hard, that could be a decent value player, but he's now going to have to be trying to beat NFL level double teams on a play-to-play basis, and I don't know if he can hang the entire game or for an entire season and give you good production. So that was my concern with him. He is just outside our top 10, I think. Yeah, he's at 12 on our list, just behind Willie Gay. But I don't know. I could be I could be looking back this time next year and be like, okay, he was definitely the best defensive tackle in the class. I just don't see it. I still think Kinlaw is kind of the guy, and it's not close. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Craig, how do you feel about Matos and Brown?
I had Brown right at 10. I like the landing spot a lot, and I liked it actually more once they got Gross Matos, because that defensive line, to me, is, outside of short, it's really young with a lot of potential talent, and if they put it together, I could see it being something similar to what San Francisco put together, where you can't really just focus on one guy, and all of them are going to have that sort of opportunity to put it together. Like Paul said, if it's a defensive tackle specifically, I think you really have to give consideration to taking him at a higher spot than you otherwise would. Most leagues he probably isn't being drafted in just because he's going to be a defensive tackle on a young team. But
Right.
the upside is huge, especially if that's a defensive tackle required league.
For sure. Are there
And
any
then,
other guys you want to talk about, Craig, that we haven't mentioned?
there are a couple guys that, have opportunities that, are going to get drafted that we didn't really talk about even in the prior show for various reasons. Jacob Phillips, Logan Wilson, those are guys that are going to have opportunities to start this year. And we've talked about it on other shows. You don't have to be a real good NFL player in terms of, this guy is going to end up being a all-pro or a Pro Bowler or something. There's guys that are going to get you sacks just because they're not as good as other players around them. And I think those guys, I'm not saying they're bad players, but they're going to be in a position to start this year because there isn't a whole lot around them. Whether they have the staying power is going to remain to be seen. They weren't taking crazy high. I think they were both third-round picks. Wilson might have been in the second. I don't have that in front of me, but like we talked about, there isn't a whole lot in Cleveland, and it's the same thing in Cincinnati, where you have Pratt, and then Wilson's probably going to start next to him if you were putting it together today. And Pratt had a nice first season, but he didn't blow the door off either. So behind that defensive line, there's going to be opportunities, and he has one of those starting jobs. He had a productive college career.
Yeah. Well, and those two players specifically jumped the highest in our rankings from last month to this month, and it is purely based on where they landed. Paul, what do you think about those two guys?
Wilson I have as my LB5. Just off of, hey, I think they see the field, and I think that defense is on the field a lot, and I think he probably sees the field for them a lot. He could be someone that's just not relevant a year from now. I don't think he's got the pure ceiling, but he should be mentioned. And I'm sorry, who was the other one? I had him listed here, and
Jacob Phillips, Logan Wilson were the two that
Oh,
Greg mentioned.
yeah, Jacob Phillips. Same thing. They have to play somebody.
Somebody's got to get in there.
I probably won't own him just because of how deep or how shallow. He's not someone who I'm looking at because my leagues aren't super deep, but he could be someone that I could add just because, hey, he wins the job and he starts. That's how I got Quan all those years ago. And hey, he starts. Oh, hey, it's after waivers on whatever night, and I scooped him up for free. And hey, awesome, this really worked out. I'm not saying that Jacob Phillips works out like that, but there are, I don't know, 4 or 5 of these guys you can mention that go, he might start. If he starts, he's not good, but he might get solos because he's not good, and they throw it over at his spot.
Absolutely. All right, so because we haven't talked about any corners in this show, and to let folks know, when with our rankings, I have a cornerback higher than any of the ones Craig has, because I look at it as when I'm ranking guys, I'm thinking it as you have to have every position starting, so you have to have a D tackle, D end, corner, all that, because I think that's the fairest way to go. So I put Jeffrey Okudah as my top corner in the class, probably because of my Lions love, but also because I love the player. And because they have Desmond Trufant across from him, I know that teams are going to target him a lot this year. So if you're hurting at corner and you need somebody as your kind of your backup, that's probably going to get a fair amount of action just because he's a rookie and teams are going to want to see what he's made of. And I like the fact that he can tackle pretty well. I mean, better than some of the other guys that were drafted in the first round. I think Okudah gives you an opportunity to give you some value. I don't know long term if he's really going to be the best corner in this class. I think that's debatable because I like Igmahogany and I like a few of these other guys that went a little later in the first and even into the second. But I think he can give you some value this year. That being said, I don't draft corners very high, and most of the time I just kind of rotate them off the free agent pile if possible. But, I wanted to make sure we mentioned the corner. Who is your favorite corner in this class? And I don't want to say is he draftable because, that's all based on your league setup. Most corners don't get drafted super early anyway. But, Paul, who's your favorite corner for IDP purposes in this draft?
Side note, so you're a Lions fan and I'm a Packer fan. Our first round selection was a player that is the best on the team. Your first round selection was someone that you traded off for an early third. Your second round selection was a position that you already had. Our second round selection was a position you already had. I forgot who you selected in the third round, but our third round selection was a player we already had. I just thought that the Lions had one of the dumbest drafts out there, and the second dumbest. Well, either way, your team had the dumbest or the second, and mine was the other one. That's a complete side.
I definitely don't like. I went in the draft going, they better trade pick 3. Like, there's no reason they need to take a corner at pick 3, and
Yep.
they didn't, and they kind of tried to use the excuse that there just wasn't a lot of value to trade it for. That's BS. Plenty of first round picks got moved around on draft night, but
take the fourth and move on.
Yeah, I really was surprised, with how that fell out, and I understand maybe Miami was like, we're not going to pay to move up 2 spots because our quarterback will be here anyway, but I doubt that was the conversation. I'm sure they offered something to move to 3, and even if, and in my mind, I thought about it. I was like, listen, even if they don't offer pick 5 and they're offering you later first, take them. There was plenty of good talent in this draft that you could have filled 2 needs, 3 needs, and I think, if I remember correctly, the third round pick was an offensive line. Jonah Jackson from Ohio State, I think, was our third round pick, or he might have been the 4th. I don't remember. Oh no, we took Julian Okwara in the 3rd, which for the next coach, I think that will be a good pick.
Yeah, I was a fan of his, but I mean, he's not someone that we're listening for fantasy. But yeah,
no.
I'll get back on topic now. I think it's gonna be. I think that Okudah, if you have a safe option, he's the safe option because he's going to see the field. For the not so safe option, I think it's either AJ Terrell or Damon Arnett. I thought that Arnett sucked. I thought he was probably a 3rd or a 4th round selection. And when you're not good, you're going to get thrown at. And thrown at means solos.
Yep.
And that's all you're looking for. I mean, yes, I know you want interceptions, but
he's not getting those.
If you get enough of them, they stop throwing at you. So I don't think Arnett was very good. And Terrell, just because everyone's going to throw on the Falcons because why not? And
what else do they
he's
got?
gonna, and he's gonna be on the field because why not? I would rather have those options, but again, the safe options of Okudah.
How about you, Kraig? Who's your favorite corner for IDP purposes in this class?
I like Paul's rationale for those two, and a lot of times it is going to be a rookie corner who plays poorly, that gets picked on, that gets you. I mean, there was a guy last year, and I can't remember that everyone was talking about. I wish I could remember his name. I'm trying to think of it. He just got picked on all the hell last year, and was great for fantasy.
Mike Hilton?
It might have. I don't think he was a rookie, though, was he?
No, I don't think so, but it was Mike Hilton. He was like the worst corner in football, and he got a lot of solos because of it.
But of the main guys, and then you would mention him, Brad, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because I don't have it down. But Noah out there in Miami, based on the talent around him, I think he's going to get thrown at a lot. And, they invested a high pick in him. They're going to be playing him. So, if you're a quarterback and, this isn't the only thing to take into consideration, but you're going to throw at Xavier Howard, or you're going to throw at Byron Jones, or you're going to throw at the rookie. You're probably going to throw at the rookie, all things being equal out of the three. So, and I think he's got enough speed to make up for if he makes a mistake, going back and catching a guy. So if I had to pick one off the waiver pile for this year and be happy about it, it would probably be him. But like you said, drafting, unless there's some crazy scoring, you're not really drafting a cornerback. So,
very true. All right. So our one question that we haven't answered throughout the show, Jason wants to know who is our sleeper pick. So Paul, start with you. Who's your sleeper in this class?
Besides my sleeper, that's not a sleeper anymore. I'll go with what you guys picked for Chin, just because of the floor and the ceiling, and the fact that they actually in certain formats. I just looked. Eric Reed was the top safety last year, tackle heavy, and
gone.
Yeah, and he's just not that. Like, I'll go Chin, Brooks, but again, define sleeper.
Yeah.
Or what? If you want upside, Gross Matos. Defensive end is such a thin position, and he has not elite traits, but if someone would have selected him 10 to 15, I wouldn't have thought they were crazy.
Right. What about you, Kraig?
I'm going to be a homer here, and I'm going to take a guy that I really like that Dallas took, Bradley Anai. I think if you're talking about sleepers, someone that you probably don't have to draft, that you can pick up and stash, I think he's got the motor, and he's shown the ability and the willingness to improve and keep getting better over the seasons. He's got an athletic background. I really liked the pick for Dallas in terms of, sort of going differently than what they had done as far as the defensive line, not going after one of those top big names that seems to be full of more problems than you'd want in any sort of player. And, the improvement that he showed and the ability that he showed there at Utah, actually BYU, sorry.
Right, BYU.
Yep. He was Utah. I'm all over
Utah.
the place tonight.
Right state, right rivalry, run school. 2 out of 3.
Close enough.
Okay.
Been a long day and a long weekend. And, anyone drafted, I think it was the 5th round that they took him, something like that. There's going to be room for improvement, and you're not necessarily counting on anything the first or second year. But if you're talking about a sleeper, someone that I can see improving over time, you have a good defense with a lot of smart guys around him to help him build on the skill set that he already has. And there is some homerism involved. I admit that up front, but I like the pick, and I think for a sleeper, I'd be very happy with him.
Shout out to Anthony Leone, who has jumped on long enough to vomit at us, and
there we go.
I'm getting him on. He's going to co-commish one of my leagues with me. I'm going to make him be some IDP loving. I'm going to go with a guy he's a deep sleeper, and he's probably completely asleep at this point. But I don't like what's ahead of him at all in Philadelphia, and I'm going to go with Kayvon Wallace, the safety. I don't like Rodney McLeod. I don't like Jalen Mills. A lot of injury prone, a lot of poor play. And with the guys that are around him, if Kayvon Wallace can get into the lineup, he can be a guy that can make some plays. The way that Philly runs that defense with that great defensive line, well above average smart linebackers, and shut down corner and Darius Slay, who we gave them for a song. I think, if he can get in the lineup, he can get you a nice solid production from the IDP side of things. But truth be told, he probably isn't going to see the field, at least this year, but he could, because Jalen Mills is always hurt and Rodney McLeod is not any good. So, that's my sleeper. I'm not sure he's necessarily a guy that's going to wake up this year, but we'll see. You never know. Jeremy Chin would have been the other guy, but I have him in my top 10. So, Paul, what do you got?
Now that I actually thought about the sleepers, Vaughn's another one. Just because
yeah.
if he plays and if he kind of, slims up a little bit, he could be in the middle for the Saints that only have Davis, and he's 32.
Right.
And he does have enough edge experience where he knows how to use his hands, where if he gets in the middle, he might be huge, and he's not going to be expensive at all.
No. Both of these guys are probably on the waiver wire. I mean, they're probably not drafted, I would guess.
Yeah. And he might end up being it just because someone looks and goes, "Oh, he got drafted in the 3rd," and he might but I can see it. I think there's a very high shot that he's a good actual player and someone who's bench fodder in fantasy, but these are all maybe long shots worth throwing out there. So.
Oh yeah, well, and with as deep as the offensive side of this class is, I expect a lot of IDP guys to hit the waiver wire, because there's just not going to be a lot of room to draft them, because we have so many receivers. Running backs had so many good landing spots. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, even tight ends. There's a lot of tight ends that I'm like, okay, these guys had a decent landing spot. I mean, who'd have thought that 2 tight ends went to New England? I'm probably going to try to grab them both late to see which one pans out. If I need tight end help. I mean, things like that. It's like that pushes IDP guys down the board. And some of them it's going to push off the board. I mean, the guys that we mentioned, these last couple, are definitely guys that I would expect to see probably hit the waiver wire, and you're going to be putting some fab on them at some point during the year, because we think they probably have a chance to get some playing time. But that being said, we could both be completely wrong, and that wouldn't surprise me either. Anything's possible in fantasy football.
It's all about who gets hurt and who plays because of injury only.
Yep.
Bond will get drafted. Bond will get drafted in anyway, my Paul and I's main league, just because the Wisconsin homers there will take him in the 3rd or 4th round, and I'll be fine with it if they want to take him. Not that I'm going to be picking much in the 3rd or 4th round this year, but yeah, most of these guys, if you want sleepers, that's a good set of 3 right there for guys that most leagues you're not going to see taken very high, if at all.
Certainly. So, all right. Well, thank you guys for hanging out. Thank you for everybody that's hung out and watched on YouTube, as well as those offensive-loving fantasy football players that are watching just to spite us. A
watch is a watch.
A watch is a watch, and we enjoy the conversation regardless. We have given you a small taste of our rookie rankings. Go to rotoheat.com and you can see all our stuff. Go, and you've been seeing it scroll all the entire show. Go over to Facebook. You can talk with the 3 of us about IDP. You can talk our Papa Tony into joining IDP leagues. You can talk all sorts of fantasy football on our Facebook group, on our Discord chat, on Twitter. Thank you to CXK and all the guys that have come out and shown love like they always do. It's great to see you guys and talk with you. Tomorrow night, Rick and I and whomever, maybe Rob, I don't know, somebody will jump on with us, and we will be talking rookie post-draft offensive side of the fantasy football spectrum. And then The three of us will be back next Monday, and we will continue to talk more over the next few weeks about rookies. We probably will slip some mock drafts in. Maybe we'll do something live on the show so that we can kind of evaluate that and have some fun with it. And we thank you guys for hanging out with us and showing some love. And we'll talk to you again next week.